The E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation was founded in 2006. Its inspiration and guidance springs from its namesake, Ed Wilson, and its mission is to foster stewardship of the planet through biodiversity research and education. Our school, the Nicholas School's mission is creating knowledge and leaders of consequence for a sustainable future, and these two missions have a lot in common. And in fact, a little less than a year ago, I had occasion to meet with Dr. Paula Ehrlich, who is the president and CEO of the foundation. And we remarked on the commonalities in our missions, and we had this idea that we might actually be able to combine forces in many instances and do more than we could do individually. And that germ of an idea spawned into an idea and then a proposal, and it has now become a reality. And we now have an official partnership between the foundation and the Nicholas School that will do a variety of things. Later this year, sometime in April, the Nicholas School will be moving into its new home, the Duke Environment Hall, and the foundation will have its home in our home in the Duke Environment Hall. The foundation and the school will collaborate on research interests, especially in biodiversity. The foundation will provide research opportunities for our students, and together the school and the foundation will work on raising an endowment for a distinguished chair into biodiversity at the Nicholas School. In addition, and quite significantly, E.O. Wilson has agreed to join the Duke faculty as a visiting professor and will come to Duke campus for 2 weeks on an annual basis to teach a one-credit course. I think that's pretty. To introduce our talk today, introduce Ed, I have the pleasure of introducing someone who needs no introduction, our Provost Peter Lang.
Good evening, everyone. It's a unique privilege for me to introduce E.O. or Ed Wilson to you today. For most of us, as Bill said, if I don't need any introduction, I don't even know why I'm up here to introduce him. But for most of us, of course, E.O. Wilson needs no introduction, which is itself a signal of his achievements as a scholar and a public intellectual and a man of the academy who has deeply shaped our understandings of our own world. Part of his genius has been not only that he discovers and teaches, but that he inspires. In one of his TED Talks, he said, "In the attempt to make scientific discoveries, every problem is an opportunity, and the more difficult the problem, the greater will be the importance of its solution." By that metric, his problems have been of immense difficulty, for the importance of the insights into the complexities of our biological world that he has made has been immense. Edward Osborne Wilson is professor and honorary curator in entomology at Harvard University. He is widely hailed as the father of the modern field of sociobiology and is a major force in the development of tools and techniques for studying biodiversity. Wilson's scientific specialty is myrmecology, the study of ants, on which he is considered to be the world's leading authority. He was drawn to this field, and serendipity is always a great thing. He was drawn to this field following a childhood injury which impaired his depth perception in his left eye. His reduced ability to observe mammals and birds from a distance led him to concentrate on insects, which he could study up close. His writings and his studies are widely praised for their astute observations about social behavior, from ants to humans, and for shedding light on the ways all creatures, great and small, are interdependent. He was the inspiration for and one of the driving forces behind the 2008 launch of the Encyclopedia of Life, a free online collaborative encyclopedia intended to document all of the 1.9 million living species known to science. In this, he was an early, inspired contributor to the crowdsourcing of knowledge, in this case, of our biological world. Ed Wilson has published more than 430 peer-reviewed scientific papers and written numerous best-selling books on science and society, including The Ants, The Diversity of Life, Letters to a Young Scientist, On Human Nature, and The Social Conquest of Earth. And I learned that just a few minutes ago that he's working still on another book. He has been awarded the U.S. National Medal of Science, the Carl Sagan Award for Public Understanding of Science, the Crafoord Prize, which is more or less the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Ecology, a TED Prize, and 2 Pulitzer Prizes for nonfiction, among more than 100 honors that he has received. And, noteworthy, he received an honorary degree from Duke University in 1978. In recognition of his achievements, he has been named one of the century's leading environmentalists by both Time and Audubon magazine. In closing these introductory comments, let's return to the inspiration Ed Wilson gives to scientists, and I would say to the curious, anxious to contribute to the growth of knowledge anywhere, those curious, anxious to contribute to the growth of knowledge anywhere. Here are 2 further comments from his TED Talks. First, the search for knowledge is in our genes. It was put there by our distant ancestors who spread across the world, and it's never going to be quenched. And as you heard, he is still teaching, and he is teaching our students, and he will be teaching over the web. And in speaking to young scientists, he said, "Go as far as you can. The world needs you badly." Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Wilson.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Provost Lang. I'm also happy to acknowledge and thank the Dean of the Nicholas School of Environment, Dr. Chemidis, and to all those at Duke whom I have been meeting this year as the latest of repeated visits that I've had the privilege to make to Duke. And I thank you all. As a native of Alabama, the state of Alabama, I will say I thank you all for coming. And, well, our relation to the rest of life, it can be put in a nutshell as follows. Scientists have found that the biosphere, that razor-thin membrane of organisms around the earth in which we live, to be richer in diversity than ever before conceived. Biodiversity, which took about 3.5 billion years to evolve, is, however, being eroded at an accelerating rate by human activity. And the loss is going to inflict a heavy price in wealth, security, and spirit unless we staunch it. Altogether, the 21st century, despite all of the present-day emphasis on technology and economics, is destined, in my opinion, to be the century of the environment. The immediate future is fully conceived as a bottleneck of still rapid population growth and high per capita consumption. Science and technology, combined with a lack of self-understanding and a Paleolithic obstinacy that led to our ruinous environmental practices, have brought us to where we are today. Now, science and technology, combined with foresight and moral courage based on a more enlightened ethic, has to see us through the bottleneck, and one hopes by the end of the century, this is one key role, as I see it, of, shall I mention again, the Nicholas School of the Environment. Now I'm going to sit down, because I'm recovering fully, I'm glad to tell you, from an illness, but if I stand up too long, my knees might buckle. And that would make my talk far more interesting and memorable, I agree, than would be otherwise the case. Of course. Let's acknowledge the great man and move on to the next topic. There's one redeeming feature of human nature that suggests that we can make the century a bottleneck and not a descent into chaos and ruin. It's that when women gain some amount of freedom and financial independence and can make important decisions on their own, the birth rate plummets. In all of the industrialized countries, you may know by this time, the so-called developed world, the fertility rate, the average number of children produced per woman, has dropped below the break point of 2.1 children per woman, except for the United States, and even there the non-immigrant population is below break point and everybody else is moving in the same direction. The trend even includes Africa, the poorest continent economically and worldwide. The fertility has dropped from 6 to 3 children. It's slowing steadily. And population analysts predict that the number of people in the world, which right now is about 7 billion, is going to peak around 10 billion before the end of the century, and then it will descend. That's about 40% more people than live on Earth today, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but it can be managed. The longest lasting effect of the bottleneck and the subject of my presentation today is the accelerating destruction of the natural environment, leading to mass extinction of ecosystems and species. The damage already done can't be repaired. Within any period of time, it has meaning for the human mind. The more it's allowed to grow, the more future generations are going to suffer for it in ways both well understood now and still unhappily unimagined. Why future generations are going to ask us, ask you too. By needlessly extinguishing the lives of other species, you diminished our own. The radical reduction of the world's biodiversity is the folly our descendants will least likely forgive us. So now let me review some of the basic, rather amazing facts about biological diversity, or biodiversity for short. First of all, what is it? Biodiversity is the totality of heritable variation, genetic variation, in any unit chosen. It can be the whole biosphere, it can be a continent, it can be your backyard. And it's in 3 levels, and this will be on the final exam, so please start writing. Ecosystems like ponds, mountainside forest, coral reefs. Then the species that compose each ecosystem. And then, as illustrated, not illustrated here, rather, I've got the first 2 of those systems on this slide, not illustrated, the genes that prescribe the traits that define the species that compose the ecosystems. Now, the question is, how much is there? Well, this is a bit out of date. I've used it because the National Geographic did this for me some time ago, and it's so pretty, and I don't want to try to replace it. But the only difference, really, is not in the proportionality of species shown in this pie diagram, but as mentioned briefly by Provost Lang, it's close to 1.9 million species of all kinds of organisms known. In fact, we are now just at almost exactly 2 million species. It's growing the overall list of species we know by about 18,000 new ones described by scientists each year. And I might add that 2 million is only a tiny fraction of what's really out there. We estimate by various means that the actual number of species, eukaryotic, or multicellular, bigger organisms, is somewhere in the vicinity of 8 or 9 million. It may be more than that, but it's at about that level. So 2 million known of those larger organisms anyway, 8 or 9 million, 18 million, 18,000 being described each year. At this rate, we will be into the middle of the 23rd century before we discover all of the kinds of organisms on Earth. And that doesn't even include the microbial species. And that points to a problem that's quite severe. and I hope in my lifetime to see some solution to it. We don't have enough experts on different groups of organisms. We don't have enough microbiologists, enough mycologists, enough ornithologists, and so on, to even explore and find the unknown species all around us. And let me just mention in passing, because we're close to it, that the Great Smokies Mountain National Park has had a program going now for a few years in which they've logged 50,000 hours of hunting with experts and students being trained and others to find species, and they're now at the level of about 18,000 species found in that park. But they estimate that as many as 60,000 species live in that park. So most of the species, even in this much-studied park, remain unknown, and quite a few of those are new species unknown to science. The pie diagram just gives you an indication of how many species are in each major group. But the important point, I think, to note is that we live in a world, at least on the land, of insects, with, at the present time, over 1 million species known. And here now is the Species-Scape, first invented by Quentin Wheeler at Arizona State, in which you get a different kind of picture. The organism shown is proportionate in size to the number of species known in that particular group. So we have this gigantic beetle, like a Goodyear blimp, hovering over tiny little, can you see the little elephants there? That's all of the 5,000 species of mammals. And they can hide under the mushrooms representing the fungi. And while I'm at it, just to show you how little we know, there are at the present time approximately 100,000 known species of fungi. There's mushrooms, there are microscopic fungi, and so on. But the estimated number, and I keep up correspondence with the leading authority on mycology, the study of fungi, the estimated number is somewhere between 1.5 million and 3 million fungi, with 100,000 known. And it's been estimated, this is not an unimportant group. It's estimated that all of the fungi alive at any given time, if spread out and laid upon the earth, would coat the earth 3 times over. And it's led the mycologists to speak out on their favorite organisms by saying they have a little, a little motto to draw your attention to them. No fungi, no future. So we need to know about fungi. Let's move on through this catalog of what remains, what's known and what's remained to be known. The nematodes, also known as roundworms, are the most abundant animals on Earth. Most of them are so small that you can barely see them, but the variety is immense, and you can see them, and some of them are large, like this dreadful guinea worm, which is about to be extinguished as a species, the only one I know of, among very few anyway, I'm happy to see go extinct. That's the one that burrows under human skin and grows to 0.5 meter in length under the skin. At any rate, these are the most abundant animals on Earth. It's been estimated that 4 out of every 5 animals is a nematode. 25,000 species may be known. The actual number has got to be, it's estimated 500,000 or more out there, and the world is just being explored for nematodes. And if you want a future, students in the audience here, and you want to do something completely new, and you'd like to be a world authority in practically no time at all, making discoveries right and left that are important, please plan on being a nematologist. If, in fact, if you haven't already decided to be a mycologist and tend to the fungi. And at any rate, moving on, let me then mention the bacteria, and you know how diverse they are. We have no idea how diverse the bacteria of the world are, and also the archaea. These are just varieties of bacteria shown here, but then I'll show you, oops, didn't mean to go that far. But that's a virus. Keep that in your mind, and then see where the archaea are. They're remarkably close to us, the eukaryota, but they look like bacteria. And none of these microbial groups are known at all to any degree. We're just beginning to study them. And the reason why we've held back, even though we know they're immensely important, is that you can't culture them. You have to know exactly what they need in order to culture a species of bacterium or archaean. And so we have to abandon that and now move to the new technique of DNA sequencing. And of course, we can do that very rapidly. It won't be long before, when you go out on the field, if you're going to be a microbiologist. Oh, not a bad idea, because you're needed badly. Is that when you go into the field, you can carry probably very soon a backpack on you, and just the way you carry binoculars, and you can do your sequencing in the field, doing metagenomics, finding out how many bacteria there are in a pinch of soil, and then maybe beginning to sequence certain critical links of the DNA, and then feed that into computers that tell you exactly what species you have, or in the vast number of cases, species unknown. And how many are there exactly? Well, we know now into the tens of thousands, but the actual number is almost certainly, and this is just a wild guess, going to climb into the tens of millions. If you take a pinch of soil, good garden soil, and count, look at all of the approximately billion or more bacteria actually in there, you are, it's been estimated, having in your pinch of soil 5,000 to 6,000 bacteria per gram. That's what it amounts to. In a single ton of soil, one estimate made is there could be 4 million species of bacteria. And these are absolutely fundamental. They are right there in the foundation, fundamental to the maintenance of ecosystems. When you hear ecologists nattering away about ecosystem studies, and they're doing birds and they're doing fish and they're doing a few other things like that, they're just at the surface. These little things, I like to call them, that run the world, are the things that we have only begun to explore. We don't even know what they are in most cases. Those are what run the world. They make up the ecosystems. So ecology is not going to go very far into ecosystems analysis until we start exploring them much more and take advantage of this immense opportunity in science lying immediately before us, especially with the aid of advanced technology. And that's why I'm calling right now for some of you to consider being an ologist, herpetologist, reptiles and amphibians, or nematologists and so on. The career and the need is very much there. I showed you a virus. A group believes to contain more genes overall in the viral world than all the rest of life combined. It includes things called prophages or gene weavers that are picked up and used by bacteria during rapid evolution. Not all viruses are devoted to giving you a head cold. Just a tiny, tiny fraction of any, menace to human. They are essential elements of the environment, and we have scarcely begun to find out how and why, and their great, their great abundance. Here's the full genetic code of one of these viruses. And I want to tell you a couple of things about them. First of all, it's how to remember, just a hint, not a hint, but a quick way to remember how big these organisms are. If you take one of the trillion cells from your body and make that about the size of Durham, a small town or city, one cell, make that. Then a bacterium is the size of your football stadium, and a virus is the size of a football. Now you've got an idea of the scale range you're dealing with. And here is something more. This is the DNA from a single human cell. And I think by this time you will not be surprised to know that something like 2,000 of these panels are needed to enclose photographs, is what we have here, of all that DNA tangled and all messed up. But you need a couple of thousand more panels to actually picture the whole thing. That's how much information is there. If you took just a single cell's content of DNA, strung it out, the 4 strands in a diploid cell, end on end, you would be, and then you couldn't see it because it's, just 2 nanometer, 2 billionths of a meter across. But if you magnified it now so that it's about the size of a piece of wrapping string, your DNA, then how long would it go? It would go the distance from New York to Dallas, approximately 1,820 miles. And as you walked along, reading off the base pairs 100 per inch, you would be, you would have 100 of these nucleotides from each inch. That's what goes into the genetic code of a eukaryotic organism like ourselves. Where is biodiversity located? Everywhere there is liquid water or the potential of liquid water, pole to pole, from the summit of Mount Everest to the Challenger Deep at 36,000 feet below the ocean surface. At the very least, there are bacteria and other microorganisms, some of which also can be found thriving in water above the boiling point, in thermal vents at the bottom of the seafloor, and supercooled water in the Antarctic sea ice, and in mine outflows with a pH of carbolic acid. These are the extremophils that we're just beginning to come to understand, which show us that when we do find life on other planets, the exoplanets outside the solar system even, then they are going to be dominated by microorganisms. We can expect to find extremophiles in even the most severe environments, severe to our form of life, on those exoplanets. And then there is a phenomenon that people haven't even started to think about very much right here on Earth, and those are the slimes. That's an acronym, SLIMES. It stands for Subterranean Lithoautotropic Microbial Ecosystems. And seriously, that will be on the final exam. These are organisms that are chemoautotrophic. That means they don't need organic base material to grow and thrive. They only need energy, chemical energy that can be derived from them, by them, from the soil and rocks, starting below the surface of the Earth and going down by as much as 2 kilometers deep. And it's been estimated that as much biomass may be in that special world of lithoautotropes as occurs on the surface of the Earth. So if we ever burned off every living organism on the surface of the Earth, there would be these autotrophic microbial ecosystems that would carry on. You could never get rid of them. And so eventually they would evolve, I think, to form a biosphere back on the top of the Earth. An interesting subject for those of you who want to write really creative and interesting science fiction. The rainforest of the world. Got to pay close attention to those. Most of the species known of organisms, mostly larger organisms, the ones we study the most, occur in the tropical rainforest shown here in black. And I'm not sure my figure is right up to date, but it covers about 6% of the Earth's land surface. It's down to about half of what it was before humanity came along. And the rainforest, particularly up in the canopy, is just beginning to be looked at, much less closely studied. Techniques are being developed to get up there more easily. This is one of our graduate students in Borneo, who is an expert rope climber, and when you get up there, you really are in a new world to study. Of course, you're in a fairly new world when you're on the ground as well. But it looks risky, and I guess it is, but that's what graduate students are for. And move on. I did not say that, Provost. Okay. Anyway, so we're now, this is just a lovely photograph by a young lady. I think it's in Barrow, Colorado. And she's up in the canopy on a place where she can work along that huge log, exploring a world that no one has explored before at all. And from this one tree in the Peruvian rainforest, I recovered, it is 42 species of ants in that one tree, living in that tree. That's the ecosystem for those ants. We're using nowadays crane this is becoming increasingly the preferred method of getting in the canopy of the crane that moves gondola around. Here's the first one used in Panama, and allows people to float angel-like above the canopy. And if you haven't had this experience, please try to get this experience when you go to the tropics. It's just amazing. Of course, there's a driver in the tower who's going to take you where you ask him to take, up, down, to the side, and so on. And here, two of the graduate students are where people have never been before, out on the edge of the foliage, too high to get up into in any other means, too fragile or too thin limbs to get out on, because it would bend under you. And let's move on to the reminder to you that there is an equally amazing and unexplored world at your feet, right here in this beautiful Duke forest. If you'd like to just step out the door and study a little-known world that close at hand. This looks three-dimensional when you walk out on the leaf litter, but it is, in fact, as shown in this diagram of a chunk of Central Park, three-dimensional, and each descent of a millimeter or two down from the surface on down deeper and deeper lead you into a different life zone in which different species occur of various of these small organisms, each adapted to the conditions of the nutrition, light, soil, humidity, prey, of other food sources and the like. So it's a ecosystem in miniature that is necessary to study in detail, knowing the names of the organisms and what you've got and what's known about them already to figure out what is going on. And there is an enormous amount of organisms of medium size, as in this insect array from just a small part of a piece of Panamanian soil. And we know that the adaptive radiation, that is the expansion of species even from single species in the course of evolution, is immense in these creatures. And there are so many of them that one can look at something as simple and seemingly unproductive as a rotting tree stump and find countless small ecosystems there, occupied in different places and different times of decomposition of the stump by different species of insects, some of which are related, some of which are not. These insects here are the larvae of different kinds of flies at that stage of that one stump. So I like to say that you could, if you were a biologist studying the fundamentals of ecosystem development and succession, and adaptive radiation. Even you could spend a lifetime in a Magellanic voyage around the base of that stump. And of course, it's a lifetime occupation. I can't pass without showing you, starting my career at the age of 13, when, as a kid, collecting all of the different kinds of ants next to the family home, that's the one in the background there in a vacant lot, I came across a very strange ant that had built big mounds. And there at 13 in 1942, discovered the first colony of fire ants away from Argentina. It's, the first one in America. So that was my first scientific discovery, although I didn't know it for a good while that it was a scientific discovery. And to show you that old habits never change, here I am 60 years later, and if I have a choice, that's what I do. This is working out from the OTS station, and I'm in the city of San Jose, and I couldn't resist getting down and starting to collect the genus I was working on, ants. I think I got something like 6 or 7 species in that one city park until the police came. We know that the tragedy is that these great forests are disappearing swiftly. And we just don't seem to be able to put a stop to it. And this is a great problem. I hope that will be addressed again and again in the School of Environment here and by you on dealing with economics and public policy and government policy and so on related to the removal of the richest, biologically richest environments in the world. We know that that human activity is spreading inexorably. These lights are from humanity seen from space with the clouds removed. And in addition to the obvious lighted agricultural and industrial areas, you'll see pinpoints of light throughout the central part of South America and over on the Congo and up above at the Sahel on the edge of this desert area. And those are fires burning, people cutting, burning, and planting in the ashes. When the area is of a living environment with its own fauna and flora is cut back, it's fragmented. We know, as shown here in the West Indies and the number of species of frogs and reptiles, that it comes down. The number comes down. And it comes down in a very regular way. And we understand some of the general principles of why species get lost in a regular and predictable way as area is reduced, as environments are fragmented. And this is as true of islands like that as it's true as island habitats. That is, habitats that are like islands on land as it is on the real islands, one to the next. I'm going now to show you this happening in the Philippine Islands and limit some time. Make me ask you just to look at that diagram. The green is the Philippine forest, the magnificent Philippine forest of, starting with 1900. And so look at the date at the upper right-hand corner in the white portion, and look at the green as we go through the 20th century. Just look at those. I'm not going to say anything about it. That's what's happening all over the world. Here is what's happened to the magnificent Atlantic forest of Brazil, the one that Darwin wanted to see more than anything else. This is one of the stamping grounds of Dr. Pym here, you will know, of studying, Stuart Pym, studying the effects of this fragmentation in the Atlantic forest. and also he's doing work like this in the Ecuador and elsewhere. This is a fundamental problem of biodiversity and of ecosystem organization that we have to face, because so much stands to be lost in the way of species of plants and animals is being lost. Now, I would point to the causes, which you can remember as through the acronym HIPPO, like the animal, HIPPO, each letter stands for a human, usually human caused, of pressure that's driving down the world biodiversity. And it goes from the most serious to the least serious, although the least serious is very serious. The H is for habitat loss, including due to climate change. The I is for invasive species being introduced at an exponential rate in every country in the world. First P is for pollution. Second P we throw in because that's overpopulation, it still exists. And the O is for overharvesting. Too much fishing, too much hunting, driving the species down, and in a few cases completely out. This is the golden frog of Panama, and it is one of those frogs in greatest danger. Its habitat is being destroyed all around it. That's the Asian hippo. It's suffering, some populations, from the deep citrid fungus that kills by suffocating through skin infection. That's the I in hippo. And it is being further reduced by hunting, by souvenir and pet hunters who want to put it into terraria. There are about 6,000 species of frogs and salamanders and other amphibians known in the world. Incidentally, did you know you live so close to the world headquarters of salamanders? That's the Southern Appalachians, including especially the national park. And 100 or more of those 6,000 have gone extinct just since 1980. And 1/3 of all of the frogs especially are threatened. The harlequin toads of the genus Antelopus, of which this golden frog is a typical member, has 113 species and 30 likely extinct already in the last 25 years, and only 5 out of those remaining 100 species can be called secure. Invasive species are next, the ones I discovered in Alabama, spread throughout the South, and then to China and to other parts of the world. Here is another one, the brown tree snake, which wiped out every songbird on Guam. Also a major project by Professor Penn. This guy is a real ambulance chaser. He's gone where he's been going, where the action is and where the greatest danger extinction is, in helping us find out what's going on and what might be done about it. How fast are species going extinct? By 3 separate measures. It's been estimated the current rate of extinction is between 100 and 1,000 times higher than it was before the coming of humanity. Even some of us believe that might even be higher, and it could go quickly to the order of 10,000 or more. Because when you are down to 1/10 of the remainder of a rainforest or whatever it is, you're down to being able to hold on to about half the species that were originally there in a sustainable way. So all you have to do is take out that last 1/10, just have it cut over, and you're gone with just about all the rest. I'm going to bring this now soon to a close, because I want a chance for at least a few minutes of question and answer. But I thought I'd just show you some of the dearly departed, or the ones much at risk. The cerulean paradise flycatcher, thought extinct, now a tiny population discovered on a Palawan island, maybe go extinct, regardless of the effort to hold on to it. The orang drastically reduced in Indonesia. The ivory-bill woodpecker gone. We cut too many of those big trees in the floodplain forest. The imperial woodpecker, the biggest of all woodpeckers, gone, Mexico. The golden frog of Costa Rica, they're almost their symbolic species. They're signature species, extinct. Tree snails, mostly gone from Polynesia. A large percentage of the plants of Hawaii, extinct or very rare, like the hina, the silver sword. The birds of Hawaii, down from perhaps as many as 150 species. Now there are only about 24, most of them at risk. Places to go to save species will be what we call hotspots. We try to find out where most species, where the most species exist that are greatly endangered, the so-called hotspots, and we try to prioritize them in these conservation efforts. A large part of the Nicholas School of Environment, I sincerely hope, will be devoted to conservation biology and to the immense array of disciplines needed to make it work. And now I will just say in closing, there's a central problem of the new century, in my opinion, and many others, conservation biologists, the one that's going to count long term is how to raise the poor to an endurable quality of life while preserving at the same time much of the natural world as possible. A good deal of it is around them. And what's the connection? Both the poor and biological diversity are concentrated in developing countries with the most political problems. The solution of the problem has to flow on the recognition that both depend on the other. The poor, especially the nearly 1 billion that are still destitute, have little chance to improve their lives in devastated environments, and conversely, the natural environments where most of the biodiversity hangs on cannot survive the press of land-hungry people who have nowhere else to go. I hope in this brief time that I've been privileged to be with you, that I've added to the conviction shared by growing numbers of thoughtful people in all walks of life that the problem can be solved. The resources to do it exist. Those who control the resources have a lot of reasons to achieve that technology. The cost isn't very high, really, proportionately. The benefits will be beyond calculation. At the end of the day, however, I'm going to say the direction we take is going to be an ethical decision. And in a civilization able to envision God in an afterlife, to embark actually seriously on the possible colonization of space after we've used this planet up, we'll surely find the way to save the integrity of this magnificent planet and the life that it harbors, because it is the right thing to do and an ennobling task of our species. As the late John Sawhill, president of the Nature Conservancy, and my friend once said, a society is defined not only by what it creates, but by what it refuses to destroy. And now I am going to close just by reading you a few sentences from a book I'm bringing out this April on Earth Day, called A Window on Eternity. And it's all about the Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, which I'm advising on the restoration of. And it goes like this. In one important respect, the living world of nature is beyond the grasp of humanity still. The complexity of its layered structure and the billion-year history of its construction lie beyond anything that can be unraveled or copied by us at this time. A warehouse of parallel zettabyte computers could not simulate it. The starting conditions might be guessed, of that we can never be sure. But the magnitude of the events in all the lives of the species reverberating back and forth across the levels of biological organization, from macromolecule to ecosystem to create natural selection through an all but infinite maze of possibilities, is beyond the comprehension of our still mostly Paleolithic brain put together only recently in geological time. This is the reality of the world we've preserved in our national parks and other reserves around the world. It is our transcendent heritage, and we'll be wise to hold on to it. We can enjoy its surviving fragments in various ways and measures, in surprise, mystery, awe, wholeness, relief, and redemption, but deeper still, in a sense of the infinite latent of the wild lands, there is a hope for the immortality of life, freed of human cares and the intervention, and allowed to evolve the way it did before we arose in Africa. While our species continues to manufacture its radically different all-human world, the rest of life should be allowed to endure. For our own safety, while preserving our own deep history, it will, if we choose to continue on its own way, as independent as possible, changing in evolutionary time by maintaining two parallel worlds on the planet. Humanity will better ensure the survival and continued advance of the rest of life and of ourselves. Thank you, Duke University. Thank you very much. I think we may have just a few minutes. Where's my moderator? Have a few minutes for questions.
Hi, thank you very much for coming. So, of course, in many parts of the world, including some parts here in the States, many swaths of the economy and people's livelihoods still rely on the environment. But in some of the very developed countries, we're seeing people think, at least perceive, maybe it is the fact of the matter, but at least they perceive that their livelihoods don't rely on the environment. They don't rely on biodiversity. How do we win the argument for with those people that we still need to preserve the environment and its richness?
There are people, you mean, in other countries who do not rely on biodiversity.
A lot of people seem to perceive it that way.
Can you name a country?
Here, I think.
What?
Here in the U.S., a lot of people hold that position.
You should say what?
I think in the United States, a lot of people see it as less important.
Oh, yeah. They rely on the environment. Trust me. They just don't know it. I mean, you know, we have to have a healthy environment. We have to have the soils, even, you know, where you have a pure cornfield. You've got to have the right bacteria and other microorganisms in that soil, just even there in a relatively sterile environment. And of course, the biodiversity of the areas above and around our aquifers and our river edges and so on is vital to maintain some kind of sustainability in our water supply, and so on and on. I think we are very much dependent on biodiversity. We just have learned, like most of the Western European countries, to import a lot of our resources, including even our food, in countries where the reliance on biodiversity is the more obvious and visible, would be my response. Okay. I don't want any questions from my 14 students in that course. You can ask me tomorrow morning.
Thank you for being here and answering our questions.
Yeah.
Some of us at the Nicholas School last semester took a class in environmental economics in which an approach was presented that was in contrast to the biodiversity hotspots map that you have behind you. And it suggested that rather than focusing on the biological hotspots for conservation efforts, that we actually focus on the economics in which the species could be preserved for the lowest cost in the hopes of getting ultimately the biggest benefit.
No.
Do you see that as a threat to an approach based in ethics,
No,
or do you
but-
see it
but
as
of course.
complementary?
Of course. There's a canard developing about conservationists that, it's about time that they cared about people, and in the economy. Listen, I've been on the board of directors of most of the major the global conservation organization, from the World Wildlife Fund, Conservation International, Nature Conservancy, New York Botanical Garden, and so on. And when in the 1980s was when the World Wildlife Fund, on the World Wildlife Fund, we began the shift. And we saw that we had to get away from just panda and tiger. We had to deal with whole ecosystems. And then quickly, within the 1980s, we saw that we were going to have a package, and this would include economic development and really caring about the people all around the park, the ones still living in the parks, and they began to develop programs that was very much economic analysis, figuring out what they could grow, what they could manufacture, and so on, without tearing the park down. Of course, they could tear the park down and make a quick buck, but we wanted to be able for them to get sustainable and well off. So that was a goal, and that attitude is, or shall we say, extension of responsibility and research has extended to most of the big global organizations, and therefore we are in a position right now, I think in the development of conservation biology, of wanting to have collaboration with economists, particularly agricultural and other resource economists.
Professor, thank you for being here. My question might be a little bit difficult because I'm wondering from a scientific point of view, you mentioned once that biodiversity should start their process of saving the earth by measuring and get to know every species. I mean, that's a very difficult task in the first place, but so in practice, what do you think this could be accomplished? And also the science, how is that, what's the boundary or the potency of science in terms of putting them into practice? And
Start again on that last part. What's going to be the question?
Okay. Yeah, so my question is, how do you think biodiversity, the measuring of biodiversity is where all these different species could be put into practice? How is that going to save the biodiversity of the earth?
You mean how do we handle this enormous biodiversity?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
We got that solved. What most people don't realize, even in biology, we're right on the edge of a technical revolution, information technological revolution that's just going to change everything. Right now, we have what's called the Encyclopedia of Life, that was mentioned by the provost, in which we're closing, the people that are running it are closing on all of the 2 million known species and of providing exact descriptions, illustrations, everything known about them that you can get at a keystroke anywhere. And also people are closing in on search images, search engines that allow rapid identification out of the knowledge of the kind that's in the Encyclopedia of Life of any specimens that are shown, photographs or live specimens or whatever. And that soon will be quick. And then in addition, we've got going the Biodiversity Heritage Library, which started several years ago, well, more than several, maybe a decade ago, in which libraries that have, a consortium of libraries that have the biggest collections of books that deal with biodiversity going all the way back to the beginning, are putting every page scanned and online, so you can, it's going to come to a total, they think, of about 500 million pages but they're well along. And you'll be able then to sit in a tent in some far-off place like, I don't know, the Rio Negro in the Amazon or New Jersey, and and study the material collecting, identify it. If it can be identified, find out everything known about it, then call up everything that's ever been published about it in the original literature. It's amazing. And that's not too many species. If we go 10 million species, you may think, I know some of the students in my course say, oh, well, what do you expect from us? You want us to know all these species. You don't have to know all the species. We're going to be able to call them up. And it's not that big a task when you think of it. Just think 10 billion people in the world, right? In a couple generations. 10 million species. You realize that that's 1,000 people for every species? That means that once we get a more educated public, and we get people like birders or studying dragonflies and nematodes, before long, you're going to have whole clubs of people, studying local nematodes, and there are people who've adopted particular species and studying it in depth. Now, this is well within the realm of possibility if we want to do it.
Thank you.
I think we have time for two more questions. One is from this gentleman right over here, and I'm going to take the glory of having the last one.
Well, Dr. Wilson, you're clearly a young, spry man, but I think it's safe to say that some of us here are a bit younger and more spry. When you look back over your career, are there lessons for newer generations of conservationists where you look back and think, man, we really screwed that up. I hope future generations don't do that. Or, on the other hand, are there aspects of conservation now that you think maybe missed the point and wish there was sort of a broader perspective?
You're referring to my career.
Well, just your insight,
What?
Your insight looking at future generations of conservationists.
I'm not sure I understand the question because I have a little trouble hearing. Are you asking me are there episodes that I found particularly troublesome or what?
Lessons in your career as a conservationist
Oh,
that
yeah.
you especially want younger generations of conservationists to learn.
Oh, yeah. You get me going all night. We have in the field biology community, and that's another great thing about doing this going into this kind of biology. You become a field biologist, boots on the ground, you get to know people in a really nice, adventurous way when you do field work. And I've got a lot of war stories. One of the most recent was when I had a team and we went looking for a special ant, a bull ant, that is the only species known outside Australia, found in New Caledonia, the island, this ancient island off Australia. And its presence on that island was curious. How did it get there? Caledonia has never been, not since the Mesozoic, has been anywhere close to Australia. And when it got there, has it evolved very far? What's it doing? And so on. But it was thought extinct. Never seen on New Caledonia. So we got word that maybe some were on a little island called the Isle of Pines, just south of New Caledonia. And we went to that island and we racked through the forest and we found it. And the stories with which, what it looked like when we saw the first ones crawling up the side of a tree. I wouldn't thrill you without, the build-up I had, but it was great thrill. We have lots and lots of adventures like that. And then we were able to study it, and then we were able to draw some pretty nice conclusions about its status and its meaning. Okay.
So I imagine seems to me finding an ant in a forest is kind of like finding a needle in a haystack, but we'll get to that some other time. So there are my understanding is some renegade scientists out there who believe that the solution to biodiversity and species being extinguished is to find a little bit of their DNA and bring them back to life, like I think some people working on the carrier pigeon. Speak a little bit on what you think about that whole notion.
You mean de-extinction?
Yes.
They call
yes.
it de-extinction, yeah, bringing species back to life. Well, I'll tell you frankly, I'd like to see a mammoth. But I'll tell you, trying to restore any significant part of extinct species is like building a skyscraper with popsicle sticks. It can only be done with a tiny fraction. And when it's done, it's inordinately expensive if it's going to be done. And then you're going to have some individuals that may not be a breeding population, they may not have had the right sort of juvenile maturation and so on. And then if you try to find a habitat for them, you might find, or likely to find, that doesn't exist anymore. So you'd be really foolish, as some people do. You'll find a lot of these people hanging around Silicon Valley that say, oh, let's do the passenger pigeon. And now it's been gently pointed out to them, hey, the passenger pigeon thrived because it flew in millions in great swarms looking for beech mast and a few other types of seeds that don't exist anymore in the quantities you need. Well, what about the ivory-bill woodpecker? Oh, well, you know, the ivory-bill woodpecker would be great, but you haven't got the cypress, the big cypress trees anymore in the floodplain forest where they need. And so what are you going to do with about the thousands and thousands of extinct insects, butterflies and so on? It's so much better. I know, I'd like to see it done just, it's a circus trick. That reminds me of the time, and this will be, I'll finish here. I got to tell you my story about with the author of Jurassic Park. Come on. What?
Michael Crichton.
Michael.
Crichton. No?
Okay, Crichton, yeah. Sorry.
He's like the famous
Well, I tell
climate
you,
scientist. Remember?
a week at Duke has blown my mind. I couldn't remember Michael. Anyway, we had dinner together. He wanted to talk about the troubles he was having with the rising sun. He knew I'd had troubles when I published my book, Sociobiology, and they thought he had a lot of criticism that he was showing Japan as a economically conquering nation. It was some crazy thing like that. So I told him about my Jurassic Park prospect. And I had, independently of Michael Crichton, decided that it could be done. We have large collections from Dominican amber at Harvard. It's about 30 million years, 20, 30 million years. And it's loaded with ants. In fact, I've done full studies on what ants were like 20, 30 million years ago in the West Indies, so I could get a picture of just how things have changed during that period of time. And I knew that some of these pieces had masses of ants of a certain species from which I might be able to extract a terpenoid known in its descendants of that species as an alarm substance. There was a good chance that I could get it out of these fossils. So I thought, I know I could get a colony of the descendant species from Central America, right? Have it in the lab. Colonies, thriving modern species. And I could get the alarm pheromone, that's one signal that the ants used, from my fossil ants. And I could then puff it onto the living colony and get a full alarm response, probably. And I would pass a message across 20 or 30 million years from one colony to its descendants. And he leaned forward and he said, well, did you? And I said, no, because it's just a circus trick. There's no science to that at all. The only thing that might be of any interest would be extracting the terpenoid and finding out what it was chemically, and whether it might have evolved from what it was in the ancestral species 20 million years ago. That would be science. But it would make the front page of the New York Times, and I said, no, I didn't try that. I didn't want to try that.
Well, I
Okay.
suspect you've made the front page of the New York Times enough times in your life. Let's thank our speaker one more time.
Okay.